Howdy and welcome to episode 10 of the 240SX 2JZ swap. In this episode, we're going to be installing the SIKKY Swaybar in the car, and we're also going to be clearing up some issues with the power steering pump on the engine, and also installing some stuff for the oil cooler and the oil sensors, like oil pressure and oil temperature and whatnot. So yeah, let's roll right into it. Let's get her done. Alright, so what we're going to do is install the SIKKY Swaybar into the car. The first step is obviously taking out the old sway bar and end links. And what I've already went about doing is installed the new end links into the car. Now, the biggest thing that I can say about this is that this U bracket right here has to be parallel. The U has to be parallel with this tension arm right here. And that gives you the best sort of setup for the sway bar. I've left everything loose here. I've only tightened down the U bracket to the actual, this arm right here. The big thing that you have to do with a sway bar install is that you leave everything loose and you don't tighten or connect the end links to the actual sway bar until the car is on the ground at the actual ride height that you want to drive the car at. So with the engine out of the car right now, we can't actually connect the end links to the sway bar. We'll do that after the engine's installed and the transmission and all that, and the car is actually on the ground. But until then, I've just went about installing the end links on both sides, and then we're gonna mock up the sway bar to the, there's some carriers, you can kind of see them over there, that ride under the car. So we're going to go ahead and install those and just kind of let the sway bar sit under the car until it's time to install it to the end links, or connect it to the end links. All right, so the next step in the sway bar install is you're going to take your provided grease that they gave me in the installation stuff, and you're going to put it into these little, I don't even know what they're called, but we're just going to put it a little bit in there, rub it around with your finger, and then we're going to install it onto the sway bar. Alrighty, so the sway bar is installed. You can see the end links aren't hooked up to the sway bar itself, but it's just sitting in there, so it's partially installed. Next up, we're going to install the urethane motor mounts. These are from Xcessive manufacturing, and they suggest that you leave these in really loose until the engine is actually sitting in the car. So that was super quick. It literally took a minute to just have these things sitting in there. As you can see, they're nice and loose. And when we finally put the engine in and it's sitting in there, we will tighten those down. And the motor mount brackets that are attached to the block, those actually get torqued down before the engine gets put in the car. The next step that I'm gonna go ahead and do is I have a Chase Bays power steering kit that I'm going to hook the hoses only up to the rack here, just so that I can lay the lines out and not have to deal with them when the engine's in and try to get to them. So I'm gonna go do that now. All right, so here's the power steering kit. You have your reservoir, and this line goes from the power steering pump to the reservoir. One of these lines, I believe it is that one right there, goes from the rack to the power steering pump on the engine. And this one right here goes from the reservoir to the rack. So we're going to take these two lines and attach them to the rack and just have them kind of laying out there. So these hoses that go to the rack, they are different sizes, so it's not like you can really mess that up. Luckily, because I definitely would. All right, I'm going to go ahead and attach the first line. And I guess it goes into this one right here. All right, so that is one hose down. And we attach the hose on this one too. So there you go. The hoses are connected to the rack there. I'll just have those off to the side when the engine goes in, but the power steering system is partially hooked up. So nothing else needs to be done to the car to put the engine in. Everything is pretty much ready to rock and roll. Besides the fuel lines, I'm going to cut those back and do the fuel lines actually after the engine's in, so I know where I can route the lines. That's it. That's it for the car. So something else needed replacing on the engine, and it's the power steering pump. Now on the VVTi engines, they have this thing called a progressive power steering solenoid. It has a 2-pin connector that comes off of it, and on the normal harness and ECU, the car sends either a variable 5-volt signal to the solenoid, which either opens it a lot or closes it, which means that when you're going at high speeds, it doesn't give you as much power steering assistance, and when you're at low speeds, it gives you a lot of power steering assistance. Now my harness, because it is a standalone system and it's a custom harness, it doesn't have a connector for this. And the problem with that, with just leaving it disconnected, is that you will basically get the minimum power steering help if you just don't send a voltage to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this power steering pump with a 2JZ GTE power steering pump, which should just bolt right on. This one doesn't have the solenoid, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to do that now. So here's the old power steering pump. All we need to transfer over from the old one to the new one is this little fitting, and then we will put the new one in. All right, so I ran into a problem. The only thing is that this hole, which one of the bolts goes through, is actually threaded, and on the VVTi power steering pump it's not. So the bolt can't go through this and into the support bracket for the power steering pump. So I'm gonna just have to drill this out so that the bolt can slide in. If you take a look at the side of the block, you can see that the water-cooled oil filter assembly is no longer there. That is because we are going with an aftermarket oil cooler system, which utilizes this instead of that huge water-cooled system. So that'll go against the block. And then on top of that, we have our sensor sandwich plate, which just fits on top of that. And then on top of the sandwich plate, we will put our OEM Toyota oil filter. So I am going to install those along with the oil pressure and oil temperature sensor on the sensor sandwich plate. So to begin installing your oil cooler kit, this little threaded male-to-male adapter came with it. You just thread that into the block. You have to actually take off the O-ring that came on the block to begin with. It's flat underneath, and you're gonna take your oil cooler plate adapter with the O-ring side facing the block. You're just going to slip it onto the adapter, and then you're going to take the second adapter, came with the kit, and you're going to thread that right on to the existing threads. And you're going to want this oriented down, or maybe even a little tiny bit angled, but you're going to want it straight down because you got an AC compressor here, motor mount here, and this is where your AN lines are going to go. So you got to make sure that it's angled in the correct orientation. So that is in. It's on there pretty good. Now what you're going to do is I have a sensor sandwich plate, and we are going to put that with the O-ring side facing the oil cooler. We're going to make sure that this is oiled up to get a good seal on there. We're going to fit that over top of it, and we're going to take our adapter for the sandwich plate, and we're just going to thread that in as well. And now all you have to do is take your oil filter. I'm going to oil this up as well. And finally, easy does it, thread that onto the sandwich plate. And now we are going to put our sensors in the sensor ports on the sandwich plate, and we're going to leave these free for now because we're not hooking up the oil cooler at the moment. All right, so we are installed. We have, you can see, a oil pressure sensor and an oil temperature sensor down there on the sandwich plate. So we'll run those two gauges inside the car. Other than that, that is the oil cooler side of things almost installed. We still need to do the AN lines and whatnot. All right, guys, thanks for sticking around. In the next episode, we're going to be putting the R154 back together so that we can get it ready to mate it to the engine. We finished that oil cooler stuff. We're getting close. We're getting close. And last thing I did was I actually welded up that coolant nipple on the side of the block. If you're going single turbo, you will need to do that. Close it off however you feel you should do that, but I decided to weld it, and then I put JB weld on the outside of the weld. Thank you guys for sticking around, and I will see you in the next one.